Hello and welcome to European UFOs. If you like this episode, then please make sure to like and leave a review, it really helps. I'm also on a mission to keep this podcast ad-free for all listeners. For that, however, I really need your help. There's a link in the description of this episode to buymeacoffee.com, where actually, for less than the price of a coffee, you can help me keep this podcast ad-free. Your help would be so much appreciated. In this episode, we will focus on UFO crash retrievals, which in a sense are the bread and butter of ufology. This has become all the more apparent since the dramatic developments of 2023, when terms like reverse engineering, exploitation programs, and non-human technology entered the public domain. However, much of the discussion surrounding UFO crashes is based on evidence from the US, notably Roswell, Kecksburg, Aurora, to name but a few. Today, we will shed some light on what's happening in Europe. The recently launched European Crash Retrieval Initiative, ECRI, has the ambition of mapping and analysing alleged UFO crash sites in Europe, both contemporary and historical. Here with me to discuss this initiative, its background, setup, and objectives is E.T. Persson, Senior Advisor to ECRI. I hope you find this episode interesting, and if you do have information pertaining to UFO crashes in your country, then please do get in touch with ECRI. You can find the contact details in the description of this episode. Hi, Thomas. How are you doing today?
Hello, Sebastian. I'm fine, thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. I'm actually just recovering from a rather bad stomach flu issue, so it wasn't too nice this weekend, but always up for talking about UFOs, and especially such an interesting project like yours.
Yes.
So what got you into ufology, and what is your background? This is one of the typical questions I always ask my guests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me it's pretty clear cut. I didn't take UFO seriously until 2019, when I was on sick leave from the police department in Stockholm, and I was working a serious crime unit, and I got all of a sudden I realized that I had cancer, a tumor that I needed to operate. So I was on sick leave for a couple of years and discovered ufology by listening to. I had heard something about UFOs being real, but it's cognitive dissonance. It's hard to take in. So I just in one ear and out the other. But then there was David Fravor was at Joe Rogan, so I finally said to myself, okay, let's sit down and take UFOs seriously. Is there anything to this? Let's see if there's anything to this talk about UFOs. And that changed everything for me, because the evidence is so overwhelming.
And do you feel your background as a professional criminal investigator contributed something to your appreciation of the subject?
Definitely. There's a lot of parallels between a typical UFO case and a typical... I used to work murders. I was a homicide detective when I got sick. There's a lot of parallels. And the scientific method is the most precise, right? But evidence can be... We have another acknowledged way of proving things in our society, and that's the criminal case, criminal law. And in a court, everything can be used as evidence. There's no rules that something can't be evidence as long as it's relevant and credible. It is evidence. So in ufology, there's not a lot of scientific evidence to go by, and there's almost nothing published. I mean, peer-reviewed and published evidence for UFOs, there's almost nothing. But the only real published scientist with evidence is Beatrice, actually. And she would agree that her paper, as brilliant as it is, it's not a lot of evidence, public published peer-reviewed evidence for UFOs. So we need another method because we all agree that UFOs are real and they're proven enough. We have enough proof to say they're real, but looking scientifically, there's almost nothing strict scientifically.
And Beatrice is one of your collaborators in ECRI, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, right?
Yes, she came up with the idea. So it's her baby, and she has other stuff to do, but she came up with the idea, which is brilliant in many ways. And so, yeah, it's her brainchild.
Yeah. The last episode I did on this podcast actually dealt quite heavily with the issue of what different categories of data there are in ufology. And it really mirrors what you just said, that a lot of the data we have in ufology is quite overwhelmingly pointing to the fact that there is something, but the data as such is highly amorphous, really difficult to make sense of. But nevertheless, if you apply rigid methods to it, I think something can be gleaned from it. So I think it's definitely a point we can all agree on. What we're here today to discuss, and I think this brings us very well back to the idea of evidence in ufology, is ECRI, the ECRI initiative or project. What does ECRI stand for, Thomas?
European Crash Retrieval Initiative. And we have a webpage that people can look into, and it's ECR-initiative.org. We haven't written that much on their website yet, but it kind of presents us and tells the audience who we are. Everyone should take a look at it. And the basic idea is to get our hands on physical evidence, which we can publish via Beatrice and other Swedish scientists, because it is a problem in ufology. And the national security states, they look at this as a security issue, and they can't seem to look at it any other way. They're kind of stuck in their realm, in their way of looking at this. So the free part of society, like scientific studies of ufology, should try to get hands on the physical evidence and publish scientific papers on it. That's the goal.
And obtaining the physical evidence would revolve mainly around crashes, as implied by the name, or are there also other lines of evidence you're pursuing here?
There is, of course, other ways to get physical evidence for UFOs and non-human intelligence and extraterrestrials. There's physical proof to be found. We could find it in other ways, but we're mainly focused at crash retrievals. That's our focus, UFO crashes, to get materials from those. But if there's a piece of evidence, physical evidence, that you can discern where they come from and kind of have a solid background of it, it's of course interesting too.
Yeah, so I was just asking because I remember a while back reading about a case, I think it was in Finland or somewhere in Scandinavia, about a UFO, and this isn't a singular case, kind of emitting some sort of slag or debris, which is a really weird thing. Why would a really technologically advanced craft just squirt out slag? But apparently it did happen according to eyewitnesses. And these sorts of, I think, metamaterials, as Jacques Vallée likes to call them, are I think also quite interesting to analyze. So this is
yes, there's actually quite a lot of cases like that where UFOs leave some kind of physical material, and doesn't seem to be any logic to it really. We have a case in Sweden from 1957 where a UFO landing, a saucer lands on a island north of Stockholm, and two gentlemen in their brand new car comes along, and their radio stops and their engine stops, and there they are. It's a landed saucer right in front of them on the road, and then it takes off and leaves, and on the ground where the saucer landed, there's a piece of some strange material. It's a kind of wolfram alloy or something, and yeah, quite hard to tell because if you don't see any logic from the materials coming from the UFO, it's hard to us to say that it came from the actual UFO. There wasn't like a piece on the ground and stuff, because it doesn't add up to us sometimes, right?
Exactly. And I think also one of the issues, though it hasn't really been published yet with these metamaterials, is that they do consist of elements that you would expect to occur on Earth, but probably the isotopic ratio is a bit different as to what you would normally find or expect. So, but yeah, I think it's also another line of really valid inquiry to look into, traces that have been left by these anomalous craft. But coming back to crash sites, how was this idea? Because I know that you guys only started doing this quite recently. When was it? I think January 2000.
Yes, exactly. It's just like a month or like that old. So we're taking it step by step. We haven't gotten any results yet. Of course, we would publish that as soon as we have it. But so everything is not set in stone, so to speak.
Yeah, and so with crash retrievals, your overall mission statement is what exactly? I think you already alluded to it a bit in terms of the transparency, that it's normally shielded off by national security. What else is there?
Well, the basic principle is to get the information out that there's a website and a organization that wants your information about crash retrievals or UFO crashes. So there's a form for people to fill out, and there's other ways of contacting us, of course. So if you fill in this form, that's our start, right? We hope that people will fill in this form, and then we take a look at it, and then we prioritize what cases to look into first. And so there's many ways to getting to the physical evidence, and here are a couple of new ones. Who knows where it may lead? Might also one brilliant part of this is the attention it might get, because if we're recognizing scientists, Swedish and European scientists, making these kinds of efforts, serious efforts in getting scientific evidence to be published, it should raise the question, and we hope that the mainstream media would pick it up. So far, they haven't, but we'll just have to keep trying.
So would it be fair to summarize that the kind of overall mission statement is, on the one hand, to ensure transparency, that this issue leaves kind of the realm of the shadowy national security state, and the second one would be the scientific inquiry, which these two go hand in hand?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yes.
Cool.
And publish the results. That's the main point, right? Publishing scientific papers on UFO material. That's the holy grail.
Perfect. I've worked in academia and science for quite a long time, and one thing I do remember quite well is the continuous struggle to get funding and the required resources to do research. So how did you guys go about ensuring that there are resources and that there is enough funding to embark on what is probably quite an expensive endeavor to, go out to crash sites, investigate them, investigate huge amorphous data sets, and so on?
Yes, that's a good question, because the first part we do pro bono. We all work for free, starting ECRI, and but as you say, as soon as we need to go somewhere and professionally investigate a crash site, that costs money. That can't be done easily if you need scientific proper methods and gear. It's going to take, and if you need to travel and so on, we need funding. And I think we will solve that part by private donations or funding. We will, if there's a crash site we need to go to, we will solve it. And hopefully we'll solve the funding too. Yeah.
That's the spirit. I like it.
Yeah.
You have to have a good idea and a mission statement first, and then other things will fall into place. I totally with you there. So, have you received any feedback from other researchers in the ufological community yet? Are you collaborating on that level, let's say, with, I don't know, Jacques Vallée or some other luminaries in that field?
We are not collaborating with those kinds of names, but we've gotten some support from big names in ufology, and we are definitely in contact with some more or less well-known names in ufology with information and tips and stuff. So yeah, that's going on definitely. We hope especially European ufology will, as you do, brilliant, you with your podcast will recognize this to get the word out and to get a conversation going in Europe, because, as you know, it's awfully quiet in Europe about on the UFO topic, and that's the main goal also, to get information out to the public and to the scientific community and academia and media. And really, media is the gas pedal, I would say. If mainstream media in Europe would recognize this serious efforts and serious topic, I think the conversation would change in academia and in Europe. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was actually really disappointed and quite shocked when Grush revealed what he had to tell the general public. And all the legacy media, particularly in the US, but also in Europe, actually ignored this, what could really be a groundbreaking story, and what was a groundbreaking story on its own behalf. And I think the only news outlet of the big legacy media that really picked it up was The Guardian in the UK, and all German big publishing houses, so in Germany where I'm based, completely ignored it. I mean, it's so ridiculous if you think about it, and it just makes you wonder, what else do you need to basically run a story? So, and perhaps, and this is where it goes back to what you guys are doing, perhaps it really is some, seeing is believing, some really nuts and bolts evidence. Look, this is metamaterial we recovered. It's been scientifically published and analyzed. It's anomalous. Perhaps it's something like that. And normally my experience with journalists is they're not very good at kind of interpreting scientific papers, but I think if they're guided with it, they can probably run a good story.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So you, I guess you have quite a good grip on what's going on on the UFO topic in Germany and the UK, I guess. So were there any newscast in German or in English in the UK about the Grush testimony on national TV, on big news? Was there anything?
Not as far as I recall. I think in the UK there are a few, as I said, so in the Guardian and that newspaper, and also I think the Daily Mail and so on. But so the UK, because of its affinity to the US, did, you know, lay its fingers on that story a bit at least. However, in continental Europe, including Germany, France, and Eastern Europe, it was a non-story. I mean, it's appalling. How can you?
Yep.
I mean, it's especially appalling because all other marginal topics from the US are happily covered by German news outlets, and then this big one where Congress was involved is completely ignored. So I think new initiatives like yours, especially in Europe, are really, really welcome.
Yeah, we'll see when they interview us about it in mainstream media. I'm not losing sleep over it, because if they're not going to do news segments on national TV about David Grush testifying under oath about crash retrievals, then I guess they won't give ECRI a call either. But times will change. Eventually, we will have this conversation in mainstream media. So we just need to keep going, and eventually the public interest is going to change. I think it's going to change this year in Sweden, and it's inevitable that it's going to change in Europe too. But when is always the question, right? When are things going to change in ufology? Seems to have always been this case, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I think we've come a very long way since 2017, since Leslie Kean's and Ralph Blumenthal's article in the Times. But there's also obviously a lot of backlash in the US from gatekeepers. So, but what can you do? Coming back to the topic of European crash retrievals. So, what else prompted this? This focus on Europe. I mean, for me, for my podcast, it was really this issue that that UFOs are obviously a global phenomenon, but they haven't been covered in Europe for whatever reason to the same extent that they have been covered in the US. With ECRI, is it also because is it kind of by your research design? Is it because it's easier for you guys to get to European crash sites because you want to start in a kind of small area of investigation?
Yeah, I mean, there's about crash retrievals. All the conversation almost is about American cases, and there's a lot of focus about crash retrieval, and almost entirely about the US. So, and we're Europeans, we're Swedish, so let's set the spotlight on European crash retrievals. And Sweden is, I mean, it's a big country, but we need a bigger market than just Sweden. So Europe, in Europe, there's a lot of alleged UFO crashes. I mean, maybe not as often as they crash in the US, you might think, but there's crashes here too. So I guess we will have to go out and investigate European crash retrievals because no one else is doing it, basically. Except the national security states, of course. But I mean, on private investigations and stuff, there need to be an engine in Europe about crash retrievals over here, so we can get the conversation starting and not only focus on the US.
Exactly. And I think, you just alluded to it. Who else is doing it? I think your main competitor, if that's even the right word in all of this, is the national security state. And to name it, it's the US military. It's so because what I'm getting at is, and I've read a lot of crash cases, but it typically comes in the drama unfolds in 3 acts. The first is eyewitnesses see that something fell from the sky. The second is the US military swoops in. And the third is there's some sort of cleanup operation. And literally, this is the case regardless of where this happened in the world, this is always the case. And given that there's this pattern, it suggests that there's quite a comprehensive security apparatus at play here. So how would you respond to that? Is there any way to kind of beat this powerful adversary in rushing to crash sites?
We'll see, but there's lots of ways, as I said, to get our hands on physical evidence. It could pop up in other ways that could be controlled enough to put something to make science of it. But about beating the national security states, that's a hard thing to look. If you look at it one way, they have all the satellites and the radar systems and stuff, and they're going to know when things crash way before we do. And if there's a crash out in the in where nobody lives, probably the national security states are the ones that are going to know about it, and nobody else are going to know about it. But if there's some kind of urban environment and witnesses, and then there's a chance, right? And historically, it could be that physical evidence could pop up that the national security states haven't laid their hands on yet, and so there's a lot of possibilities to get. I don't think they. I mean, if we would find, like an extraterrestrial being, a actual ET, that would be serious. That would change the conversation, and I don't think. When that day comes, we'll see how we will deal with it. But I don't think it's something that happens every day. So I don't think we should calculate too much what to do with an extraterrestrial being. But materials, on the other hand, there's probably a lot of small pieces, fragments of materials that haven't been picked up over Europe, I would say. The only problem is finding them, of course, because they're probably really, really small. But if we get our hands on a really, really small piece of metamaterial, let's say, magnesium, zinc, and bismuth, let's say, I don't think in this, where we are at this point in 2024, we might get the green light, so to speak, from the national security states and the Americans to publish it, because it won't change much. I mean, there probably won't be any 100% proof that it is from a UFO. It probably won't be any 100% proof that it's non-human, but it might be good evidence. And I don't think that's going to change the conversation. I don't think the world will panic if we publish a scientific paper with metamaterials. People are not going to go crazy. The stock markets are not going to crash. I don't think. Hopefully, it get noticed at most, maybe.
Yes, I think the issue here really is who gets to the stuff first, and I think it's a really valid point that you just brought up, is focusing on, perhaps the scraps that have been left behind because I think we can, if something big crashed, I mean, to my mind, there's no doubt who's going to be there first, simply because it's a multi-billion competitor you have to face there, getting to crash sites first. But focusing on the scraps is definitely a really valid point that's left behind. Yeah.
Yes, I don't know. As I said, I don't think in 2024 that the national security states are going to see it as any big problem, really, for a small piece of UFO material being scientifically studied. It's not going to change much, and we're all sitting in the same boat, right? We don't want to cause any large-scale panic, but I don't think the national security states, if they do their analysis correctly, they should realize that publishing a paper on a small piece of material that's pretty unclear that it's from extraterrestrials or non-human, it's just going to be good evidence, but it's not going to change the conversation, really, because the fact that there are materials from Ubatuba and Roswell, we all know that we don't need any more evidence to say that's far beyond reasonable doubt. There are materials, and people know this. Tens of thousands of people know that there's materials. I mean, millions maybe now after Grush testifying. There are crash retrieval programs because UFO crashes, they leave physical traces, and the national security states are they have it. And there's also Nolan and Valet, they have the material. So, and that hasn't caused any panic, right? Not even close. So I don't think it's a problem.
No, definitely not a problem. And on the contrary, I think it's going to make a really valuable contribution to, pushing the discussion one step further, because this is a long game. I don't think they're going to, it's not going to change overnight, but it's really important that there's a concentrated effort to move the discussion forward, and focusing on that is a good way.
Yeah, probably there's a big plan to how to do this disclosure with a big D, and we're a couple of years into it now, and it's not going to be able. They can't stop it now, I think. But what could happen is, of course, if some other countries with materials and physical proof, if they kind of terminate the old deal about the US being the disclosure country. I mean, that could happen as it looks now. There are rumblings about other countries, foreign adversaries, making disclosure. So that could actually happen, but let's hope it doesn't actually.
I know you're still really in the early phases of ECRI, but could you perhaps give us a really short overview of how you would go about acquiring data on crash sites? You already mentioned the online form where potential eyewitnesses can give you information about a potential crash, but how would you go about investigating a case after that?
Yeah, so of course there's an analysis about the information, and then you need to prioritize the best evidence for where to go, and what can be effectively won by going somewhere. You have to calculate, is it worth the time and effort? That's my game, like prioritizing after how much evidence, corroborating evidence, and see. So if we have a crash site, let's say in Poland, and there's one witness, or there's two witnesses, or maybe it was a big thing back in the day. So there's a lot of info to get the precise location. That's the first problem, to get exact location. Date, of course, is important, but the exact location is, of course, the absolute most important thing. And then you need to get your eyes and ears on, as soon as possible, actually, I would say, on site. And if you have eyes and ears on site, then a lot of things are going to clear up. You're going to understand what people could have witnessed anything, and local people would probably have knowledge about what happened, or maybe they know who lived there at the time it happened, and so you can go from there and maybe get higher fidelity than you had from the start when you just had a form filled out from our webpage, which is not going to say a lot. So, and then of course, securing the place, so to speak, to see how the actual scientific serious effort, when you have to dig through the ground in some way, or penetrate it, or do it by LiDAR, that's the next step, right? So I look at it as in two steps. First, the recon part, and then the actual big effort to go there and scientifically dig out the place in a correct way. And that's not my expertise. That's other people have expertise on that part. So my main focus is the judging the evidence, corroborating evidence, and then the actual digging in the ground. There we will get that expertise from others, then not from me. Yeah.
But I guess with your background, you would be very skilled at assessing the eyewitness testimonies, right? Provided these individuals are still living, right?
Exactly, yeah. That's always the biggest part in ufology. Without human intel, without witnesses, we wouldn't have anything, right? Radar returns and stuff, that's really interesting to get speeds and accurate speeds and stuff about UFOs. But without human intel, we have nothing almost. I mean, UFOs, I think actually, I lean more and more against this notion that UFO sightings are not accidental. I would argue rather that it's more about the witness than about a extraterrestrial going from place A to place B and just happen to get observed by people on the ground. That doesn't seem what UFO sightings are many times. It seems to be about the observer more. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah, and there's also this kind of related bizarre phenomenon that you might have a group of people, but only of this group, only one or two individuals see a UFO. And even for these two individuals, it may look completely different. So you do have a lot of that going on, which kind of supports what you just said. It also neatly brings us to another topic that I would like to get your ideas on, and that's, I think, one of the big issues in ufology also is that question, well, why do they actually crash? I mean, recently in the wake of what David Grush has been revealing, there was quite a bit of discussion about this, about different theories. But what is your take on this? Why do UFOs crash?
Yeah. So we should be able to divide it into two categories, I think. They're accidental or they're not accidental. I can't see any other categories. So if there are accidents, then they're accidents, and I think that's the case in many cases. But I think Roswell case, for instance, my guess would be that it's not accidental, but I would say that's just probable cause, maybe, that it's not accidental. Because, in New Mexico at that time, there was Goddard. He did all his experiments with rockets and liquid fuels there. And it was also the place for the Trinity first atomic bomb test, and it was also the home of the 509th bomb squadron, the first squadron that bombed the first used the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So that seems to be a lot of interest in rockets and in nuclear weapons, because those two things combined are significant, as the UFO interest kind of reveals. The UFO interest in nukes is quite clear. And so there's a home in New Mexico at that time for both rockets and atomic weapons. So maybe that wasn't an accident, actually. And so why they crash, and that's Virginia is that's the best UFO case there is, in my opinion. Considering all criteria about what makes a good UFO case, the Virginia 1996 case in Brazil is the best one. And perhaps you could suspect that it was shot down in that case because they knew it was going to. The Americans knew. They told the Brazilians that it was going to crash before they crashed. Seems like. But we don't know. I have only guesses about why they crash. It could be more or less informed guesses, just so. Does it matter? Well, our goal in ECRI is to get our hands on the physical material. The question about if it was an accident or if it was shut down or if it was a gifting field kind of scenario, that's for academic interest. That's a later question, right? So it's hard to answer. It's a really hard question. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I just wanted to pick your brains on that because it's something we're all struggling with. This idea: well, why would something that is so advanced repeatedly crash on this planet? On the face of it, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But then this phenomenon is so complex that.
Have you thought about if there are so many UFOs on planet Earth that we only see a fraction of it? If our UFO sightings are only a fraction of the activity that's going on this planet, then maybe that could explain that many crashes, that it's actually much more prevalent than we suspect. So there might be just a small, tiny fraction that crashes by accident, and that's what we see. We only see that part. We don't see the actual presence. The presence could be much bigger than we understand.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I think only about 4 or a little bit more than 4% of the European landmass is actually covered by human-built surfaces. So, that leaves 96% that are actually, not with any urban context. So there's a lot of potential for stuff just falling from the sky, as small as it might be, and remaining undetected. Again, I do think that if something big crashes, probably the US military apparatus will have its eyes on that. But there's probably a lot of potential for smaller things to be discovered and to be analyzed appropriately. Great. Let's say, so you've taken us through the methodology, you get eyewitness accounts, you then analyze them systematically, you go to crash sites, get potentially your hands on materials, then analyze them scientifically. What happens once you've published them, and what happens to the materials? And this goes a bit back. This is also an issue that has been raised recently in the context of Grush, this idea on the Schumer Amendment, this idea of eminent domain. So who owns the stuff? Is it the government? Should it be in private hands? Is it up for the research community? However that is defined. What's your take on that?
Yeah, as far as I know, it's not my expertise, but I know, of course, I'm knowledgeable about the criminal laws and the laws that govern government and policing quite good. But as far as I know, there's no regulation about non-human materials. If there is, I haven't seen or heard of it. And I'm talking in a Swedish perspective now. So if it's not illegal, it's legal. So if nobody owns it, then it's, I think in a jurisprudence, in looking at it from a strict law kind of way, it would depend on how long the material has been on the grounds, I'd say. Because if you find something that's only been there for a day, or if you find something that's been a part of a piece of land for hundreds of years, then it would maybe be recognized as a part of the land. But so that's a hard. I don't think anybody can answer that question. I don't know. But we're gonna look at it as a piece of material that belongs to the human race and this planet and us as the scientists that are going to take a look at it and investigate and do experiments on it. We're going to look at it as ours and then publish it, and so it can be viewed scientifically and for the whole world to see, hopefully. And if anybody wants to claim that we don't have a right to do that, well, we'll see how we'll handle it then. I can't really see a problem in that regard. The expropriation thing is concerning American private industry, the military industry, and we're not a part of that, and we're not a part of their laws in the US. So I would say that doesn't apply to us. And if anybody claims that that's the case, then they have to show us a law that governs it. I don't think there is for us.
Yeah, I think in the US there was partly, so it wasn't really because it didn't get passed in the end, eminent domain, but I think there was also the issue of whether Nolan and Jacques Vallée, who are notably in possession of metamaterials, would then have to give them to the US government. So this was also on the table, but then again, it's not really anymore. So what is your feeling about once you've published this and it's in your possession of collaborating with tech companies, tech investors? What do you think? And this kind of perhaps is not something that is part of your role in ECRI, but do you, on a personal level, do you feel this is something that should be made available to private tech investors, this sort of technology, or is it something that above all should be studied scientifically, and after that it's up for society to decide what happens with it?
Yeah, I think for the benefit of mankind, right? That's our mentality towards this. It's for the benefit of mankind, and a private industry has a role to play, right? It shouldn't be all government. That doesn't work. So, but then of course there's also when private industry comes in to do business of things, it needs to be regulated, and it needs to be. We don't really know how this is going to play out, right? In the American case with the private industry, that's a whole can of worms. That's very problematic. So how this will play out, I can't really tell, really. But we'll all do it for the benefit of mankind, and scientific evidence and scientific inquiry into the subject, and spread the word. And then the private contractors, private industry are going to maybe come up with new ideas, inventions from it. And that's the way the world turns, right? So I hope it will play out in a good way. I have no idea how it's going to end, but what do you think? What do you see?
That's fair. I mean, I think it's one of the things you can't really avoid to deal with tech investors and the filtering through into the tech industry, nor do I think it should be avoided, because if we follow the idea that it should be for the best of mankind, then I think history shows that when something is left exclusively with the government, it might not be always the best choice. So I do think that tech companies do have a role to play here. However, it should be guided by ethical principles. This isn't unique to ufology, but also applies to other things like cancer research, etc. So I think there it's then more, once we have reached that step, more discussion we need to have on ethical and philosophical grounds than anything else. But I think it was already a bit hinted at in the context of the Rush revelations. Who owns this material? What is it for? And I think we can all agree on that it should be made transparent and openly available, and not cloistered off by the military industrial complex. I think that's just actually a crime, especially as we have now discovered, or as we've probably always known, as that we've been blatantly lied to for more than 70 years. And if what Grush says is even moderately true, people have been, threatened with violence, intimidated, and so on. And that's obviously just, crime. There's no other word for it. So, yeah.
No, absolutely. It's a lot of foul play. And some people ask, why don't they land on the White House lawn, or why don't they make public contact? Well, we need to shape up. We need to do better. We need to the foul part of this ufology is kind of shows why we're not really ready, and so ufology needs to change in some ways, really, because we need to raise our voices, and we need to unite, and we need to go by evidence, and our moral standards should be. We can't tolerate that the national security states, and mainly maybe the private military industrial complex. I mean, Eisenhower told us this over 60 years ago. He warned us about this, and it's not we need to go in a different direction with open scientific inquiry and private industry that wants to make new technologies. And there's nothing wrong with making money, but the way it's been done in the shadows in the past, that's not healthy. It's a very unhealthy way to conduct this kind of effort about crash retrievals and making technology out of them. And we have the national security states for a reason. It's for our own safety, and so their job is to look at the safety issues only. And if they hire military contractors for making weapons out of them, that's what they're going to do. And if that happens for 80 years in the shadows, that's one route, right? But we need this other route with open and free society and private industries, free entrepreneurship and stuff, and see how that plays out. And let's not only make weapons of them. Maybe we can make other technologies that benefits mankind and not only are done because we want to kill each other, because of countries have borders and we have different cultures, and so it's very unfortunate that it's become a weaponized issue.
Exactly. But I think, at least fortunately, probably they haven't really made any progress on that level either, because one of your main mission goals with ECRI is to create that scientific transparency. And what has happened so far is really the worst case. It's being shut off behind the military industrial complex, them doing their own research, and no one really being able to figure it out. Because if you only have highly compartmentalized research projects working on minute details of something very complex, no progress can really be made. I mean, it's not a big secret. And if we are to believe, different whistleblowers, then this is exactly what happened. They have no idea what it is. They pull it out of the box every, 10 years or so to see, well, what new researchers have actually, what new generation of researchers can make sense of it. But, for 70 years or so, no one has, I believe, that really a clue what we're dealing with. Perhaps some aspects, if you are willing to believe Philip J. Corso, have been, filtered down into private industry and so on. But I think the overall picture, due to that compartmentalized system, is still really missing. And that's a genuine tragedy.
Yes,
so
definitely.
Thanks a lot, Eric. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thomas, yeah, Thomas.
Well, E.T.
It's been
or Thomas, yeah.
E.T.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. It's been really great talking to you today. By way of wrapping this up, so we've already mentioned the website. I'm going to put it into the description of this episode, obviously. And am I right that on the website there's also a possibility to report crash sites?
Yes, exactly. There's a form to fill out if you have any information about a crash site. Yeah, so last thing, Beatrice is on a mission to get, she looks at this as she's a scientist, and she sees it as her mission to get scientific evidence and to wake up the scientific community, academia, about there is actually scientific inquiries and discoveries and knowledge to be gained from ufology. And so that's what ECRI kind of is. It's one of our offshoots for this goal of hers to help wake up the scientific community. And by then, if we manage to do that, then things might change in that way. What do you think that that's possible?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if there is enough, nuts and bolty things coming out of your research, something that, even the most skeptical scientists can read in a, ideally peer-reviewed journal, I think then that's very beneficial to moving the debate forward. So for the listeners who want to get involved, there is this means of reporting crash sites. So dear listeners, if you have witnessed something in Europe, then do please go onto the website, which you can find in the description, and hand in your case there. And Thomas, is there also a way of contributing financially to ECRI for those who want to do so?
If there is some interest in financing, they should look at our website and contact us via our webpage, ecr-initiative.org, and we'll take it from there. So, that's what I can recommend.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for being on today. And I think we've had a really interesting discussion about crash retrievals and what they also mean for society and for ufology.
Thank you.
Great. Fred, would love to have you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, great to talk to you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.